Good morning, everybody. Today is the 16th, and we are talking about creatine. Now, creatine is something that many people are probably fairly familiar with. Maybe they know it as creatine monohydrate. And I wanted to go through and give you a little bit of background on this compound, and background and, kind of the significance of it. So let's go ahead and get cracking. Our first question is, what is creatine? On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see what that molecule is. And one of the things that I think is, good to sort of reflect on and think about with respect to this class is, well, we've got some functional groups there. For instance, we've got a carboxylic acid shown right here. That takes us back to our organic chemistry days, or the time when we were talking about when we were talking about different functional groups. Um, Now, in addition to that functional group, well, creatine is an amino acid. But unlike all of the other amino acids that we've talked about, this is what's known as a non-proteinogenic amino acid, which means that it is not involved in the production of proteins. So what I mean by that is that this amino acid will not be integrated or will not be used as a part of a protein. Now, that's not to say that um, creatine is completely separate from any discussion of proteins, because if you think about, people who take creatine on a regular basis probably also take a protein, take whey protein or something like that. But that's more of a physiological, or that's more related to basically its role in muscle building. Now, creatine is synthesized from three different proteinogenic amino acids: cysteine, glycine, and arginine. Now, the one of these that we really focused on more than anything else would be our arginine, because we talked about arginine as a positively charged amino acid. This has the single letter code of R and has the three-letter code of ARG. Now, this helps produce energy during, or creatine, what it's kind of known for is that it helps produce energy during high intense activities. People can synthesize it, so it's something that's naturally occurring and naturally present in your body, but you can also get it from your diet. Now, what I want you guys to know a little bit about are some of the biosynthesis of creatine. Where does it come from, and basically how does it support ATP production? Because that right there, supporting ATP production, is probably the most common role that creatine plays for folks. So, in addition to taking supplemental creatine, you can actually get creatine from your diet. For instance, if you are to eat beef or fish, you're going to get some creatine from those sources. So, approximate numbers are, well, if you eat 100 grams of tuna, you're going to get 0.45 grams of creatine. Not a whole lot, especially when you think about, does anyone know off the top of their head, if they take creatine, what approximately is one scoop of creatine? If you know that, go ahead and add it. I'll give you a couple of seconds. Um, Other fish, herring, for instance, well, maybe there's a little bit more. There's zero point 0.6 grams per 100 grams. If you take supplemental creatine, one scoop is about 5 grams of creatine monohydrate. And that monohydrate, don't that's not like, oh, well, that's different from the form that's in any of these sources. It's not. Um, so it's quite a bit more efficient to take like a micronized or creatine monohydrate supplement than to, eat 10 times 100 grams of tuna every day, because that would be, let's see, yeah, you get 4.5 grams of creatine, but you'd also be eating a ton of tuna, in which case you might get mercury poisoning, because tuna and fish, they have lots of mercury, heavy metals. In addition to that, you're eating more than 2 pounds of tuna. And if you're like me, then you're gonna have to mix in a lot of mustard, some mayonnaise, some pickle relish to make it like palatable because I don't like tuna unless it's in sushi. Well, then it's wonderful. Where does creatine come from? Aside from those sources, well, within your body, it comes from your liver, your kidneys, and your pancreas. Now, creatine synthesis, we've got our kidney and our liver that are doing the heavy lifting. Like I said, creatine can be produced what's known as endogenously within your body. And the way that that's done is a molecule known as guanidinoacetate, acetate, or GAA, is produced in the kidney and sent over to the liver. GAA, with a molecule known as S-adenosylmethionine, can be combined to produce creatine in your liver. So, creatine itself, if you were asked the question, where is creatine produced? Well, it's produced in the liver. When it's produced in the liver, then it's able to enter the bloodstream and it's able to circulate. It can go into this throughout your circulatory system. It can also be metabolized and basically form creatinine, and that will be excreted through your kidneys, through your urine. Now, what's significant about creatine when it comes to its role in energy is this right here, the CR/PCR system. This is the creatine phosphocreatine creatine system. Okay, so what I want you to do is think about what are the compounds within your body that are super important for energy. Well, maybe the simplest compound that's super important for your body is ATP. ATP is the energy currency that your body uses. ATP is a high energy molecule that enables your heart to beat, your lungs to expand and contract, your fingers to move. That's what ATP is. So, arguably, you need this. Now, there are ways that you can get ATP. For example, eating food. Whenever you ingest food and break down sugars or break down fats, you can get a bunch of ATP. That's great. Where does creatine fit in there? Well, creatine fits in there because it can be used to make this molecule known as phosphocreatine or PCR. Phosphocreatine is a compound that basically supports your ATP store. Okay. So, how does that work? Well, creatine undergoes a reaction known as phosphorylation. So, creatine gets, I'll just label it as a P with a circle around it. So, phosphocreatine, whenever that's produced, that has a phosphate group that can be transferred to, so PCR can transfer a phosphate to ADP to make ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Now, that might seem like, oh, just a bunch of alphabet soup, and okay, well, that's a lot of stuff going on there. But the significance of that is ADP, your adenosine diphosphate. Whenever, so every time I move my muscles, ATP is broken down. It's broken down into two things, ADP and phosphate. Phosphocreatine, PCR, transfers a phosphate onto ADP to make ATP. So when you're Like when you go out to sprint or when you sprint somewhere, or you do like a push-up or something like that, you're using ATP. Phosphocreatine adds a phosphate to the product of ATP breaking down, which enables you to make more ATP so you can continue doing that push-up or continue doing push-ups. So that's effectively the role that phosphocreatine is playing. Or that's kind of indirectly the role that creatine is playing. So creatine supplements phosphocreatine, which supplements ATP. So that's the important takeaway of the role that creatine plays within your body. Now, with that, this is kind of a breakdown of the process, and this is what I want you to know. GAA produced in the kidney goes to the liver, liver makes creatine. Creatine then enters the bloodstream. Within individual cells, creatine is utilized to make phosphocreatine. On the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that creatine molecule, and in just a moment, you'll now see phosphocreatine. That phosphocreatine, with the presence of this phosphate group right here, we can transfer that phosphate onto ADP to make ATP. Now, that's done with the help of a couple of enzymes. One is known as, and I want you to know this enzyme's name, creatine kinase. Creatine kinase is what takes creatine to make phosphocreatine. And there's two different or several different types of those creatine kinases because what they do is they are able to move the phosphate onto creatine, but then they're also able to move the phosphate onto ADP to make ATP. Now, that's kind of the molecular or mechanistic approach of and significance of creatine versus phosphocreatine. Now, what I think is really kind of more interesting, though, is to think about it in a, yeah, but how does this relate to whenever I go to my kitchen and I add creatine to water and drink that? What's the significance of that? Is creatine something that's actually going to improve, or is there a record of creatine improving athletic performance? Now, the first thing that I want you to know is that creatine is, and you've possibly heard this, creatine is maybe one of the most well-studied dietary supplements or nutritional supplements. It was first discovered by Michel Eugene Chevreul in 1832. And if you're thinking, wow, he pronounced that so well, that would be my way of thanking my seventh, eighth, ninth, and half of 10th grade French teachers. Only half of 10th grade because, well, I didn't do well in the final. So it was best that I no longer took French. The function of creatine has been extremely well studied. Um, it has been studied very, very well since the mid 90s, but it was initially discovered in 1832. Now, one of the things that's important about creatine is, well, it's one of the most dominant sports supplements on the market, accounting for more than $400 million in annual sales. Creatine was extracted from meats and since has been if you buy creatine at the store, it's synthesized or it's synthetic. That means it's produced in a lab in large, large, large volumes. It's not extracted from meats because that would be, well, it's much more cost effective. Now, creatine for exercise and sports performance, with recovery considerations for healthy populations. So, of the many different proposed ideas and theories as how creatine helps, well, one idea is that it helps max efforts in any sort of lift, enhance glycogen synthesis. Basically, the idea is that it can play a role in how you use energy and whether or not you're tapping into an energy resource. Glycogen. Glycogen, for instance, is a long-term sugar store. So everyone's body has glycogen, everyone's muscles have glycogen. And if you are using glycogen, that means you've depleted ATP, you've depleted free glucose in your body. And so your body's basically saying, okay, well, I need to get more glycogen out. Because I need more energy. In this paper, they studied a number of different groups and they studied a number of different components of these different groups. For instance, they looked at track sprints, swim sprints, pursuit cycling, which is the kind of velodrome, or the velodrome is the name where it takes place. But if you ever watch the Olympics, the people who have thighs that are like this, they do these sprints on their bicycle and they go around and I think they go like 50 miles an hour or something like that, just extremely fast. Um, so anyway, in this paper, they looked into those different things, among others. And in this paper, I'm sorry, let me go back. This is what's known as a review article. So what the authors of this did was they looked through, let's say 20 years worth of research. And they said, let's look at all of these different studies and how they analyzed creatine and the effectiveness and the efficacy of creatine. So in one paper, they might have looked at, well, how does creatine improve a track sprint? How does creatine change bodybuilding and muscle mass? These authors said, okay, we're going to look at all the different papers and we're going to organize them. We're going to say, these are all about bodybuilding. These are all about sprints. These are all about swimming. And they looked at all those papers and they said, okay, well, this paper concludes this concludes this concludes this. And they came up with kind of a summary. In this paper, what they did was they said, all right, well, let's categorize this and let's see what happened. Now, one of the things that they detailed was what was the standard or what was the dosing protocol that was used in these papers. And they weren't really all over the map, but some used what would be considered a high dosage of creatine. And that high dosage would be 25 grams of creatine per day or 20 grams per day. This they referred to as a loading phase. So for 10 days or a week, the athletes in these paper, the subjects in these paper would take 20 or 25 grams of creatine every day for 7 or 10 days. Then, after that, they would do 5 grams a day every single day for, say, 11 weeks. And what did they conclude? Well, in this paper, just as an example, they said of 19 trained males who were observed for 10 weeks, who on week 1 took 25 grams of creatine per day for 7 days, then took 5 grams of creatine a day for 11 weeks, what we observed was the fat-free body mass that they had went up. Their ability to, or the weight that they could bench press, squat, those all went up. Body mass stayed the same. In another study, where they studied 14 male elite cyclists, they observed them for 5 days after having them take 20 grams of creatine a day for 5 days. They noticed that their VO2 max, which is basically how much, actually, I don't know how to describe that. I know that a higher VO2 max is better, or is typically better. And I think that it has to do with basically, it's a measure of their aerobic capacity. Their VO2 max stayed the same in that time frame. The time to exhaustion went up, so maybe they got a little bit more endurance out of this. But that's what was studied here. Now, this is interesting because it gives a little bit of a range. 5 grams of creatine a day is kind of the lower standard amount, a dosage. About 25 grams a day, that's a pretty high amount. Now, what they also looked at was, in this paper, they looked at dosages and they looked at time frames. And they kind of concluded a couple of things. With an untrained athlete, 30 days of creatine supplementation has been shown to improve strength even without supervised concurrent strength and conditioning programs. So even if you're a untrained athlete, you might benefit or you might have strength benefits from creatine supplementation. Now, in a more trained athlete, those who participate in Ironman competitions, having a loading phase that 20 or 25 grams a day um, could lead to a increased performance. Now, with that in mind, I want you to understand those differences. 5 grams a day versus 25 grams a day. 5 grams is kind of your base level, whereas 25 is the loading phase. And those are different dosages there. And those are all going to potentially impact different people in different ways. There are, however, some studies, and this was one study where 61 college football players were subject to taking 20 to 25 grams of creatine a day. So they basically started loading and kept going. What was observed? Bench press increase, bench press endurance, body mass increase, soft lean tissue, all of these things increased. And so that's one, those are different findings of these papers. No adverse no adverse effects were reported. I think that it kind of goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you are taking creatine, whatever dosage, I think that it's a very responsible and important thing to do to speak with a physician. Because I am not a physician, and I'm certainly not anyone's physician, so I am not advocating for this. I'm reporting what is shown in these papers. Now, another thing that people are always kind of curious about when it comes to creatine is timing. Should I take it before a workout or should I take it after? And a fair question then is, well, sorry, that's a fair question. And this paper right here, timing of creatine supplementation around exercise, a real concern. And this is also a review article where they looked at all of the data that was out there to date. And they said, well, creatine supplementation increases muscle total creatine or TCR content and exercise performance. Okay. Several factors may modify this response, including age, diet, and exercise. Okay. Supplementation close to exercise appears to be superior, enhancing muscle total creatine content compared to when supplementation is far from exercise. So if you take it at 8 in the morning, but then exercise at 2 p.m., that's going to have a different impact than the person who takes it at, 1:45 and then exercises at 2 p.m., 1:45 p.m. Now the question is, does does creatine around exercise further enhance total creatine content? That remains unknown. Is creatine before exercise more effective than after? That's also an unknown. So essentially what this paper concludes was taking creatine close to, not necessarily before or after, but close to as opposed to far from your workouts is a good idea, is a better idea, I should say. Now, the last thing that I have to say about creatine is, well, one thing that it is potentially involved in is cognitive benefits. So, effects of creatine supplementation on brain function and health. While the vast majority of research involving creatine has focused on skeletal muscle, so basically, can you lift a lot of weight or something? There is some research that suggests that creatine has a positive impact on your cognitive ability. Now, prelim studies indicate that creatine supplementation has the ability to increase brain creatine content in humans. Creatine has shown some promise for attenuating symptoms of a concussion and a mild TBI or traumatic brain injury and depression, but its effect on neurodegenerative diseases appears to be lacking. So, is there some evidence that that creatine supplementation can have a positive effect on concussion-related symptoms? Yeah. Um, Neurodegenerative diseases, however, like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, it's not going to impact those, or it doesn't appear to change any of those. Now, the purpose of this narrative review is to summarize the current body and explore and pertaining to creatine supplementation, phosphoryl creatine or PCR, and total creatine. So, what I want you guys to know about creatine is one, I want you to know basically where it comes from. Either it's supplemental or it comes from your kidneys and your liver working in combination with one another. The amino acids arginine and glycine are used in order to produce this guanidinoacetate or GAA. That takes place in the kidney. Now, S-adenosine methionine, which S-adenosine methionine is the component that's in the liver. That is going to basically react with GAA to produce creatine. Now, what I showed a little while ago was that it's involved in, or cysteine is involved. Cysteine is upstream of S-adenosine methionine. I want you to know arginine, glycine, those two big ones are in the kidney and make guanidinoacetate. GAA and S-adenosine methionine in the liver is where creatine is actually produced. Then creatine, when it's produced in the liver, can be transported throughout the body uh, or throughout the circulatory system and the bloodstream. That creatine, whenever it enters a cell in skeletal muscle cells, well, this right here can be used to produce phosphocreatine, which supports and supplements and augments ATP. Now, one of the ways that I always think about this that I think is helpful is to think, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. If you're going to run, let's say, a marathon, you got 26.2 miles to run. Your body is going to go through a number of different energy stores. The first thing that you're going to go through is the ATP that's currently in your bloodstream. Your body's going to use the ATP to move your muscles, to support, keep your heart pumping and everything like that. After ATP, that's when your body goes on to use PCR, the phosphocreatine, which supplements ATP. After you've exhausted or gotten close to exhausting your ATP and subsequently your PCR, you're moving on. And that's when you're going to go and start breaking down glucose. Any sugar that's in your bloodstream, you're going to start breaking that down. Once that's been broken down, then you're going to go on to glycogen. Because glycogen is going to be used to make glucose. Glucose is going to be broken down to make ATP. So think about phosphocreatine, and creatine is basically a stopgap. It's there to support ATP. It's not going to completely replace it. It's going to support it. Maybe it's going to, maybe for those first, let's say, 600 yards, 800 yards, you're going to exhaust that ATP, and then you're going to support that. So your first 600 yards, let's say that you're using ATP. Then for yards 600 through 900, that's when phosphocreatine is going to help you out to get you onto glucose. If you don't take any supplemental creatine, are you still going to have phosphocreatine? Absolutely, because your body is still going to produce phosphocreatine to help supplement that ATP. The entire idea behind creatine supplementation is to basically fill this bucket up as much as possible so that you can make a bunch of phosphocreatine, so that you can support making more ATP. If this right here is low, you'll still do that. But if two people, one has 5 grams of creatine and one has 100 grams of creatine, well, one of those people is going to have a creatine phosphocreatine system that's a little bit more robust than the other. The person with the 100 grams of that creatine is going to be able to have more phosphocreatine, which will in theory help them along the way. Okay, so I want you to know those things. I also want you to know about dosages. I'm not going to ask any details about papers though, but I do want you to know about what's a kind of standard dosage and what and where creatine's coming from. But that's what I've got for today. On Monday, we'll be reviewing for your exam. Your practice exam is up. It's available for you to do. Our next exam is a week from today, and that's what I got. So I hope you guys have a great day. I hope you have a great weekend, and I will see you again on Monday. Thank you all very much for coming.
Hey, Dr. Gray, I have a quick question.
Sure, what's up?
I had sent you an email around probably 8 a.m. About me missing like the first 15 minutes of class. I came around 11:15, but I just wanted to know if there was anything that I needed to do to make up the points, or was there attendance taken today?
Yeah. Well, I got attendance, but you're here.
Okay,
So
perfect. Yeah, I made it. I was just about 10. I was running 10 minutes behind from my appointment.
I'm sorry I didn't get back to your email, though.
No,
I'm
you're
sorry.
okay. I completely understand. I know mornings can be chaotic, but thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye bye.